What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco, and today we're here to talk about KVO, key value observing. Now, this is kind of an introduction to reactive programming because this is essentially what those frameworks that you normally hear about, like ReactiveSwift and RxSwift. These, I believe, are actually built on top of this system that is actually provided to you by Apple. So I'm going to be going over essentially the Apple implementation of reactive programming by using just your regular KVO. And as you can see in the project, and if you want to start a project, it's going to be in the link down below. But as you can see, what we're doing is we have this view right here. Now we have a label right here. We have a button that's called update name. We have another label right here called age, and then we have a button called update age, and then we have a label right here called text, and then this is actually a text field. Now what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you how to use KVO to update these values in essentially what can be turned into real time. We'll actually be seeing real-time changes to the label through the text field. So anything that I type in the text field, it'll automatically be updated right here and right here. And then for the buttons, we're just going to go ahead and keep it very simple and basic for the explanation, and we're just going to hard code the change. There won't be any text field or anything like that involved. So let's go ahead and take a look at the view controller real quick, just so that you can see everything that I've done so far. As you can see, everything is connected. We have the name label, age label, and text field all connected through outlets. And then we have the did tap update name, did tap update age, and did our text field text did change. So all of these are connected, and now we can actually just start talking about KVO. So KVO, or key value observing, essentially works with KVC, key value coding. If you aren't familiar with KVC, just go ahead and watch the video that I recorded the other day. It's up there in the little eye thing, and you can watch that and then come back to this video. So essentially it works with KVC so that it can be notified, so you're able to send notifications whenever there are changes. So that's why it's called reactive. Whenever there's a change, there's a notification sent, and then something happens. It reacts, right? So what we're going to actually do is we're going to create a user object. We'll just keep it right up here at the top. You know, we're not going to put it in a whole nother file. We want to be able to look at it and reference it, change it whenever we need to. And we're going to put it right up here at the top, and we're going to follow the KVC, guidelines. So as you can see, we have your basic user object following the KVC model, essentially having it conform to the NS object as well as have the keyword @objc for each of our properties. And now what we want to do is we want to use KVO. And KVO essentially is making it so that whenever these properties are changing, they're sending out notifications to notify any observers that there are changes, right? So, they're changing, they want to be observed. Yeah. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that they are essentially exposed to we have to either do one of two things. We have to make sure that they're exposed as dynamic in the Objective-C runtime, or we have to set those notifications manually. So let's go ahead and add that right now. All right, so let's go over what changes took place right here. So, like I said, there's one of two ways, and that's the reason why I have two properties on this user object, is to show you the different ways that you can do this. Both of them are the same, and depending on what you want to do, one may have a benefit over the other. Now, the first thing that you can do to make sure that your property is sending out notifications whenever it's changed is simply by setting it as dynamic. If you set it as dynamic, it's automatically going to send out notifications saying, hey, I changed, notice me, notice me. It's doing that. So that's what dynamic is essentially doing. It's making it so that the Objective-C runtime knows that the value for this is dynamic, and also including that is it's going to be sending out notifications. Now dynamic has a lot of other stuff that it does, but that's all we really need to know for this particular use case. So the other way that we can do it is we can set those notifications ourselves. Now, as you can see, instead of using the keyword dynamic before var and after that at objc, what we're doing is we're including in our will set and our did set functions, we're having some code in here. So as you can see, the will set is doing will change value for key. Now, we could do for key path the same way that we're doing it down here. I'm about to talk about the syntax right now. Just know that you can do either one of these styles and it doesn't really matter. But anyways, we're doing will change value for key, and I'm going to use the hashtag key path to make sure that I don't spell it incorrectly. Once again, if you might remember from the KBC video, you can use a string right here, and the only problem is that you might misspell it, which can cause your app to crash. So we're going to use key path right here. And in the did set, we need to send out the did change value. So you need to send out two notifications, one before it changes and one after it changes. And the did change value, we're using a little bit different syntax, and you might have never seen this before because I never saw it before until I was looking into this specific topic. But this is essentially doing the same thing for key path, but it returns a different type of value. So let me show you what the syntax or what the autocomplete looks like when we do it. What we're doing is we're doing this did change value for, and it's actually a key path object. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to do that different syntax in order to get the key path, and it will be able to know what type of value is actually going to be returned. It's going to be, it's working kind of with generics, and essentially it's giving extra information is all you really need to know. It's giving information, letting letting everything know that not only are we going to be using the string age, but age is actually an integer, so it passes additional information. That's all you kind of really need to know. Anyways, we could have done either one of these ways. It doesn't matter which one you want to do, whichever one you think is best for your coding practice. But I would recommend one of these two ways as opposed to using a string, just so that you don't misspell anything. Anyways, getting back to the point, all you want to do is you want to make sure that you have both of these notifications being sent out in the correct spot. So will set will have will change value for key, and then did set will have did change value for the key path. So as long as you're setting those, then notifications will actually be sent out and we'll be able to observe them. So now what we want to do is we want to create an instance of our user object inside of our view controller down here. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so as you can see, now we have an instance of our user object, and since it is a class, we can set it to let because it's actually pointing to a reference in memory, but just know that you can use let or var, whichever one you want, as long as you're not changing the actual object itself. Anyways, we have an instance of our user object, and it's actually prefixed with the @objc keyword because that is also needed to make sure that it's able to observe notifications. So if you don't have the @objc, it won't be able to observe notifications. The next thing that we want to do is we want to add observers for both the name and for the age of the user. So let's go ahead and do that now. Alright, so what we're doing is we're using this function called observe, which is provided to us through the NS object, anything that conforms to or that inherits from NS object. And the observe function once again takes in one of these key paths, and as you can see, it's a little bit weird syntax, but it's using the same syntax as right here. And what I did was I said /dot, and it's able to grab the user right here. What we could also do if we didn't want to keep it ambiguous, what you could do is you can say view controller, and essentially what it's doing is it's drilling down into the object, accessing the property, and then from within that property, user.name, we're accessing the property of that object, I should say, and we're also being able to access what type it is. So essentially we're passing not only the name, the string the string name, the actual string like name, but we're also passing that it is of type string. The value is of type string. So that's what we're doing right here. Weird syntax, I know, but if you could get over it and start looking at it, it's not too crazy. Next, what we have are options. So what we're going to do is we're going to observe different options. Now, there's only 4 different options, and you're only really ever going to use maybe about 3 of them. The different options are, you have new, you have initial, you have old, and you have one other one, which I always forget because you don't really use it. You have prior. So these are the 4 different options that you can choose from, and let me go over what type of options and when you would want to use these. So initial is going to give you the initial value of whatever this object is. So let's say we're observing the name right now, right? Well, we're going to get the initial value of whatever name is. So right now, name is just going to be an empty string. So if we were to observe changes, it would immediately call whatever's in this block of code right when this is called, because it's going to give you the initial value. The old value is whatever the value was for this property before it was set up. So it would give us the empty string before we change it, and then if we change it to Kyle and then we wanted to change it to Kilo, it would give me Kyle before and after, essentially. So it's the old value. The new value is whatever you're changing it to, and prior essentially sends notifications twice, so before and after a change. So that's what prior is. But we're only going to be observing new. Next, what we have is the actual observer itself. So since view controller is the observer, we're actually going to have an instance of view controller right here. If it makes more sense, you can consider this strong self. It's kind of like strong self. Instead of having to do guard let self equals strong self, that's kind of what it is right here. It's a strong reference to whatever the observer is. And then the last thing that we have is the change. And then the change is what actually allows us to see what to get the actual different values. Now, since we're not sure if we are including .new in our options or .old, it's going to return that value as optional. So we'll actually have to go ahead and unwrap that, but that's where we're going to be accessing our values right now. All right, so let's take a look at what we have going on in here. What we're doing is, as I said, we're not, the function is not sure, or the closure is not sure if you actually are observing the .new, so it's going to give you an optional whatever type this value is right here. In this case, name is of type string, so it's going to give us an optional string. As you can see right here, it's well, it doesn't show it, but yeah, it's going to give us an optional. It's going to give us an optional string, and we need to unwrap that. So we're getting updated name, and then we're just going to go ahead and set the updated name to our name label, and that should reflect on inside of the UI. Now, as you can see, we still have an error right here, and that's because this observe function actually returns a token. So you want to always keep reference to your token until you de-initialize this view controller, or else the observations won't continue to work. So as soon as the token has disappeared, the observations no longer work. So let's go ahead and add those tokens. All right, so as you can see, we have the name. I created a name observation token, which is really of type NS value observation, and we're just setting that name observation token to the return of this observe function, and it will actually return that token to it. Now, once we go ahead and update the name, it should be ready to receive those changes, or it should be observing those changes. So let's go ahead and add the update name inside our did tap update name, right? Like, where else are we going to put it? All right, so user.name is equal to Kilo. So as soon as we tap that button, it's going to set the name to Kilo. We should observe that change, and then it should update the label inside of our view. All right, so let's go ahead and tap update name. We're going to hit it, and it changes it to Kilo. So as soon as as soon as I tap did update name, it changed the user right here, the user.name value to Kilo. From there, since it's dynamic, it's able to send out notifications saying, hey, I got updated. And it was, since our view controller is observing that, observing changes on the key path user.name and anything that's new, it's going to be calling this function right here, or this block of code right here, and it's going to execute everything in here, which we're essentially just updating. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for age, just to show you that, you know, since these two are different, that it's still, everything's still working. So let's go ahead and add that right now. All right, so as you can see, now we're gonna actually use the age observation token. We're setting it right here, and once again, same thing. We're using that weird key path, and I'm using the shorthand. So instead of using view controller, I can just say dot user.age. So backslash dot user.age, and it's able to infer that we're talking about this user right here. So view controller is optional. It's up to you if you want to include it. I did change this to just dot name instead of adding the square braces around it, because it's not an array, it's actually a set. So we're able to use just a single value if we wanted. It's the same thing as doing this though. If you wanted to do that, that's fine. And then lastly, VC, because once again, our view controller is the observer. It's whatever the view controller is, or I mean, whatever the observer is. So if it's, you know, in this case, it's a view controller. In some other case, it might be just an object, but whatever. But you can call it whatever you want. So I'm going to call it VC and then change. And then everything is essentially the same. We just have to convert that number into a string, and then we're setting it to the age label. So let's go ahead and make sure that that works. And obviously, we're updating it right here. Like, we got to update it, right? So let's go ahead and see if that works as well. All right, so now we have update name, you know, kilo, that still works. Update age, it turns to 27, that's working. So as you can see, no matter, depending on whatever way that you want to implement this, it's still going to work. You just have to choose one of the, you have to choose one of them, and, you know, just work with whatever one you feel is the best for your situation. Oh, and another thing before we move on, since we are working with tokens, sorry about that. Since we are working with tokens, you want to also make sure that you get rid of those tokens when you, when this view is going to disappear. So we're going to just add that in right now. All right, so as you can see, we just implemented our view will disappear method, and we're just saying whatever the token is, in this case the name observation token, we're just calling invalidate on it, and age observation token, we're calling invalidate on it as well. And that's all you have to do to get rid of those tokens and stop observing. All right, Kilo, so what is the text field for? Well, the text field is to show you that, you know, if you're working with an object that you actually don't have access to, and, you know, in this case, a text field, you don't have control over the code that's inside of the UI text field, right? Then what you would have to do is you would have to implement like an intermediate layer, or just an intermediate variable to make that thing observable. So the text property on a UI text field is not observable. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an observable property and then have that update the text and the label, or we're going to be observing the changes for that property, observable property, and that will allow us to change and update this text label right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put in an observable property right here. All right, so we have this new dynamic property that is called input text inside of our view controller, and this time I made it an optional string so I can show you what I'm talking about when I talk about double optional. And what we're going to do is anytime that our text field changes, we want to just change the value on the input text. Now, I know that we can just do this right on the label, but that's not the point of what we're trying to accomplish. I'm trying to show you, you know, reactive programming and the concepts behind it. Now, you could just update the text, the text label.text property directly, but the benefit of using you know, KVO or reactive programming is that it allows for notifications to be sent even when you're working with asynchronous tasks. So if this was happening like in the background or something, everything would still work. So just keep that in mind, that even though you could just set, you know, the text label.text property to this value, that's not what we're trying to accomplish here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say input text is equal to our text field dot text, like so. From there, what we want to do is we want to go back over here, and then we want to add another observer so that we're able to observe the changes on our input text. So let's go ahead and do the same thing that we did for these observations right now. Alright, so as you can see, I just did the same thing up here. I added another token, so input text observation token. Your tokens can be way shorter. They can be named way shorter, but you know, for the sake of clarity, whatever. Anyways, we're just doing the same thing. We're setting the input observation token to whatever's being returned by this observe method, and we're using the similar naming convention as the age observation token. And I wanted to show you the double optional, so new value would actually be a string. It's double optional. So let's go ahead and unwrap this value and then set our text label.text value to this, whatever the new value is. Alright, so as you can see, once again, since input text is an optional string, it's returning whatever that value is, but optional, so it's an optional string, so it's double optional. So we're unwrapping it as string specifically, and then we're setting that value to this text label.text. So let's go ahead and see if that works now. Okay, it's currently not updating just because I forgot to do this this text field right here. I forgot to connect it correctly, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the storyboard and just connect it correctly. So I think I have it doing value changed, but that's not what we want to observe. We want to do editing changed. So let's go ahead and change this. Oh, I had it as touch up inside. That's definitely not what we wanted, right? So we're going to go to change that, and we're going to do editing changed, and let's go ahead and run this one more time. Alright, so here we go. Once again, name works, age works, and we're going to start changing the text. Hello, and as you can see, as we're typing, it gets filled in. So that's pretty good. So that's key value observing, that's KVO. That's pretty much all you really need to know. A couple of other things that we can go over right now is just to show you that if you were to keep age like just at objc and you didn't implement these two notifications, essentially the KVO for age would no longer work. So I just want to show you that real quick. So when I go ahead and hit update age, as you can see, it's not updating the age. However, there is a notification that's sent out if you specify that you're updating the values. So down here in our did tap update age, if we were to actually change this and if we were going to set it using KVC as opposed to just setting it in a normal Swift way, then the notifications actually would get sent out. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Alright, so down here in the did tap update age, we're using the user.setValue 100 for key age. Now, I'm actually not using the hashtag key path on this one, because if we were to use the hashtag key path, it would actually break. But if we were to keep it as a string right here, I believe it still works. So let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. Alright, so when I tapped update age, you can see that it does update to 100, and we do have the notifications turned off. So it will observe changes if you do keep using KVC. But if you start using regular setting of values, it will no longer work. So we can just double check that one more time, and all we're going to do is just switch the different methods of setting that value, and we'll see what happens. And as you can see, if you're not using KVC, then no notifications will go out. So let's go ahead and change that back, and we'll just keep that as such. And then the very, very last thing that I just want to show you is that there is a different way to observe changes. If you don't like observing changes this way with the token and everything, there is a different way. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and comment out. We'll just do age again. We could have done any one of these, but we'll just do age again. And we're going to just remove the tokens, any references to the tokens. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just implement all this in a different type. And I'm also going to include the input text observation token in the we're going to invalidate that as well. All right, so once again, our NS object provides us with a different function that we can implement outside here. So it wouldn't be like this observe, it would actually be outside in the scope of the entire object, in this case the view controller. And we can implement it right here in its observed value for key path of object change and context. So what we could do is we would do essentially the same thing, just a little bit different. So let's go ahead and unwrap the age, and I'll show you what you have to do to unwrap the age and then set it back to the age label. All right, so as you can see, this observe value, which is inside of our observer, in this case the view controller, is going to be receiving any and all observations, and they're all going to pass through here. So we're going to check what key path it's using. In this case, we want to just check the age because we want to change the age this way. And I'm actually using the hashtag key path right here. So I went back up into the user object, added the will set and did set, just so that there aren't any weird errors or crashes. And then what we're doing is we're unwrapping the change, which is optional, and then we're passing whatever key that we want. So in this case, we want the new key because that's what we're going to be observing. Just like before, we could have passed the old key, you know, the prior key, or the other key if you want it, whatever. And then we're casting it as an integer, wrapping that integer in a string, and then sending that to the age label. But right now, we still haven't set any observations because we already commented out this add observation token right here, right? So what we need to do is we need to add an observer for this particular key. So let's go ahead and add that observation now. All right, and all we need to do to add an observer is simply say add observer, say what the observer is. In this case, we're going to make our view controller that observer. So we're going to say self. For key path, once again, hashtag key path user.age. That's the value that I want to observe. And then the options, I just want to observe any new changes, and context we're just going to set to nil. So now if we go ahead and run this, we should be getting our age to update just like before. So we go ahead and update, update name, update age, we get 100. And just to show you that it works with the other one as well, the regular setting, not just the KVC setting, let's go ahead and try that as well. And we update age and it turns to 27. So as you can see, all this stuff is all working. So there's a couple of different ways that you could do KVO. This has been a really long video and I went through a lot of them, but I think that it just gives you a lot of different options to choose from. And now you're going to have, slightly, little bit better understanding of KVO whenever you want to implement that into your project. So if you want to get started with reactive programming, this is where I would recommend that you start. You start doing your own reactive programming before you jump into another framework like RxSwift or ReactiveSwift, and kind of get the basics, get the hands-on before you jump in, because this is probably as easy as it's going to get, and this is as most sense that it's going to make, because as soon as you jump over there, it's a steep learning curve if you don't have a full understanding of KVO. So that's going to be all for today. Hope you guys liked the video. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them down below in the comment section. And if you want to help support, check out, get the t-shirt, or you could go to kiloloco.com, check out my membership, get access to all my exclusive content, as well as get the project files for this and any other video that I put up on YouTube. So make sure you check that out, and above all else, keep coding passionately.